know Jesus Christ.
Yes, they did.
Didn't they hear what he said?
They did what he said.
They wrote down what Jesus said. They wrote down what Jesus said. They wrote.
Okay, so in the Gospel of John, Jesus says a lot of I am sayings, very famous sayings. Before Abraham was, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world, etc. These I am sayings. And at one point, of course, he says, the Father and I are one. So my question to you is, do you think the historical Jesus really said these things?
I think most of these things were not uttered as we find them by the historical Jesus. I think most of these things were not uttered as we find them by the historical Jesus. So I suspect we don't have too much difference on John. My view is the Gospel of John is a horse of another color altogether. It's a different genre. John is often compared to the wisdom literature. It's like wisdom is personified. Chokmah, Lady Wisdom, or in Greek, Sophia. She wanders the streets. She calls out to people. She does things. Well, nobody would read that and think, oh, did you see Wisdom going down the street the other day? Nobody would think that as a literal person. What is mysterious to me about John is that once you say that and say, okay, perhaps we should interpret the I am statements as he is confessions, he is the light of the world, he is the way, truth, and the life. He is the bread of life. A confession of the Johannine community that likely generated that version of the gospel. About the time you think John is a gigantic parable, and then along comes a scholar who says, you know, it's loaded with historical details also. And so that's what makes John so tricky. There is a Society of Biblical Literature section devoted to John and the historical Jesus, chaired by a scholar named Paul Anderson. So that's probably more answer than you want, but I don't disagree with you too much on that point. No. I think John is studded with historical details. Yeah. Maybe you called them nuggets. That's not a bad way of describing John. Okay. But I think the synoptics are more than just some nuggets.
Okay, so let me just add to pursue it then. I mean, John, I think both of us are agreeing that John is not historically accurate. It's theologically been probably the most important of the Gospels, I would say, historically, and people relish the theological. But in terms of its historical accuracy, if you were there, you would not have heard Jesus say these things, probably. It's a later theological reflection.
Not in so many words, not like that. No,
okay.
I don't think so.
So if we toss John out, what about...
We're not tossing John out, but... And by the way, Bart, I object to saying it's not historically accurate. Well, if something that isn't exactly historical, how is it not historically accurate? It'd be like saying, you mean the parable? The parable was a fiction that Jesus told? It's not an actual event? You mean it's not historically accurate?
Right. Well, we would have to argue what John was intending to produce, whether he was
That's exactly what the question
is. And we have no access to his intentions.
And that's and that's true for anything from antiquity, I suppose.
Okay, so
but that's why we do exegesis.
All right, so if we agree that John is not historically accurate, which one of the Gospels is? All right, no, you have said that Jesus didn't say, okay, you are not going to use John as a blueprint for writing the historical life of Jesus because you think it's metaphorical. So,
to sum up, it is now widely agreed among New Testament scholars that Jesus himself, the historical individual, did not think of himself as divine and did not teach anything like the later doctrine of the Incarnation. The New Testament sayings in which Jesus seems to claim divinity, such as he who has seen me has seen the Father, I and the Father are one, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me, are all in the Gospel of John, and it is widely agreed they cannot be responsibly attributed to the historical Jesus, but are words put into his mouth by a later Christian writer around the end of the 1st century, some 70 or so years after Jesus' life.